Hi, everyone. It's Ken Rakowski. Welcome to Metal Mentoring, where we get to spend time with amazing people from around the planet. This week is a bit unique because generally we meet the people on Saturdays, but today's speaker is just all of yours. You get to discover him with me together. So Brian Keating is not just a professor; he's a physicist. He's a help me out. I don't want to say it right. It's not a cosmetologist, not a cosmetologist.
That's right.
There's a difference. Cosmology, yeah, whatever. And a book. Matter of fact, the whole idea of this book of not getting the Nobel Prize, it kind of takes a lot of balls to write a book about something you didn't get.
That's right.
You do have a beef with the entire Nobel committee, which I tend to agree with. And I know you want to share some wisdom and knowledge with us, and you have a presentation. Let me give you access so you can dive on and have some fun. By the way, thank you so much for sharing time with us today.
It's my pleasure. I love sharing the stage with other mentors around the world. What you're doing is a incredibly important mission, and hopefully we'll get some leverage out of it today.
Let's do it. You got control.
All right. So I have control. That could be dangerous, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So I got this up here. Let's see if this works. Do you see it full screen or part screen?
We got it. Looks good.
Okay. Sweet. So I got to talk about my book, which is really, it's not a science book per se. It has some science in it, some hard science, but it's really a memoir. It's a diary of kind of what it feels like to aspire to greatness for pure and impure motives in my case, and to do so in a way to achieve the highest heights of glory that a scientist or really anybody can achieve, and then find that those dreams literally turn to dust in a way that I'll describe. But it's mainly written because I have an observation that I came upon during the writing of this book, which is that, we spend most of our lives fighting headwinds. And because of that, we actually can do the math, and simple calculation means even if you have a headwind, you fly into a headwind, and then you think you turn around and go home, you'll fly with a tailwind. You'll never make it in the time that it would take you without any wind at all. In other words, you're always spending more time in headwinds than you make up from tailwinds. So the key is to enjoy the ride. And I came upon this in a very unique set of circumstances that started with, of all things, a dust jacket of a book. Can you guys see the next page?
Yep.
Okay. So I don't know about you guys, but whenever I get a book, the dust jacket always comes off. And that's actually not a good trait if you want to collect large sums of money from old books, first print books, because actually the dust jacket is the most important, valuable part of any book collector's desirable quantities when it comes to collecting books. But I always thought, what the hell? Like, how much dust is getting on people's books? Like, where are they reading this, in the middle of the Sahara? But ironically, dust would come to be the villain of this book, but in some ways a hero too, as I'll explain, because without dust, we wouldn't be here talking. It's actually only thanks to the same dust that vexed my Nobel Prize ambitions that I could be alive and existing, and all of us could be existing for a reason I'll explain to you later. This is a sketch of Galileo Galilei, his telescope that he used 410 years ago this month to observe for the very first time celestial objects through a powerful piece of technological kit. And Galileo is my number one scientific mentor. And so it's fitting that I get to talk to you guys who are mentors and hopefully inspire some other people to do what I did when I was a kid and emulated Galileo Galilei's great accomplishments, not for the first time, of course. But I always point out, if any of you guys have kids, if any of you guys mentor young people, I'm talking about 12-year-olds, and below, get them a telescope. It is this doctor's orders, because with this telescope, you can make and discover things, and these kids can discover things that could someday become their career, as it did for me. And I always say, with this telescope, a tiny little telescope, and I'm thinking of, partner. Let me know if anyone wants to partner with me on an own, bespoke line of telescopes, because that's kind of my ulterior motive someday, to sell Keating brand telescopes. No, just kidding. There's not much money in the telescope business of telescopes this size, but Galileo had this amazing experience and encounter that you too and the children and mentees and proteges in your life can replicate. And I always say it's very different than trying to replicate the thrill of discovering the Higgs boson. for that was not done by a single individual. That was done by 6,000 individuals, I point out in my book, none of whom, to good approximation, won the Nobel Prize. In fact, none of them who built the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Europe won a single share of the Nobel Prize. It only went to 2 people out of the 7 people who conceived of this idea known as the Higgs boson. So you couldn't even experience what it felt like to discover that in the least. Yet, with a small telescope, not too much bigger than the one pictured here that you can get on and most electronics websites or online retailers, you can replicate exactly not only the discovery, but the emotional thrill that Galileo had. And we all know that when you make an emotional, visceral connection to someone's learning, they retain that forever. So what did Galileo do with this? Well, he, is my mentor. So what I tried to do is replicate what he did, which is to write a book about my discoveries. And you see the book. This is one of the most famous and expensive books if you try to buy it in history, and it's called the Sidereus Nuncius, or the Sidereal Messenger, or the Starry Messenger. And it's really a hero's journey, a discovery catalog, or captain's log, and more aptly put. And you see in the upper left, there are these pictures of these circles and stars. It looks pretty comical. I mean, I'm not a good artist, but I could probably do better than that. But what he's depicting there is the planet Jupiter, the giant planet, and dominates our solar system. And he's depicting the appearance of these little stars to the left of it at first, on the 10th and 11th of January, 1610. And then a little bit later, they kind of move with respect to Jupiter. Now, I'm not that smart, but I probably would have thought, oh, that's something fishy, but I would have moved on to other things, like looking at my neighbor next door who I had a crush on. But Galileo didn't do that. Instead, what he did is turned it to every other object in the solar system that he could get his hands on, making all the discoveries he could do before he would be revealed and exposing this technology to the rest. It would be like, Apple divulging the iPhone 12, schematics before it had a chance to make a penny of profit. He used this tool to help build his empire and to build his influence. His currency was not dollars or lira even. It was intellectual influence, and he had a dominating influence on all of European science. And in fact, on science today, as I say, he influences me to this very day. So what could you ask for as a mentor more than influencing people 400 years, nearly half a millennium hence? So what he tried to do with it is make some money. He had a lot of mistresses to support, some illegitimate children to support, at least 3 that we know about. And he took the telescope to the Venetian Senate, and there you see him in front of some splendidly dressed individuals there. But what this actually was a military arms contract essentially going on, because what these Venetian senators wanted to do is to spot enemy ships coming over the horizon before they could be spotted with the naked eye. And Galileo said, if you use my telescope, which I'll provide you for a princely sum, I will make these telescopes and you will remove all the benefits that stealthiness had provided in the past. So it's really this concept that he wanted to both extend the reach of his technology and make scientific discoveries that makes him so unique. So the next thing he did is he realized, if I just build a whole bunch of telescopes, I'll flood the market, and they won't be that valuable. And it took a lot of time to make these. He had to make these each by hand. He couldn't outsource them and get their landed costs down to a reasonable value. But instead, he said, well, I can't make the device, but I can make the instruction manual. And I can make the Sidereus Nuncius. And he self-published it in a matter of about 3 months. And he published it in March of 1610. And instantly he became famous all over Europe. He didn't become rich. He never became rich from these book deals. And many of us who write books have aspirations of being like the great scientist Kim Kardashian here. But really, books writing is a kind of a poor way to make a small fortune, unless you start with an enormous fortune to begin with. But instead, he kind of was feeling a little bit too much of his oats, and he decided that he would disobey the sort of imprecation by not only the most powerful person in Catholicism, but really the most powerful person in all of Italy, and that was the Pope Urban the Eighth, had forbade Galileo from teaching the Copernican theory, which is the theory that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Instead, the sun is, and all the planets go around the sun, not the Earth, as had henceforth been assumed. So Galileo ignored that and published another book called The Dialogue. Here it's shown here. And I like this book because he underlines his title. So his title is Linceo, which means a member of the Academy of Lynxes, which was this big-eyed animal that they chose to use as their as their kind of avatar. It's sort of like an early version of the Nobel Prize that he wanted to put down his bona fides, and this was the most prestigious and pertinent of all of them. But anyway, you notice even I don't know that much Italian, but this is written in Italian, not Latin. And he was allowed to write in Latin because nobody in Italy really spoke Latin, so it wasn't considered teaching, and it didn't violate the injunction that the Pope had put upon the teaching of Copernican thought, which was supposedly the backing of the Old Testament, seemed to suggest that the Earth was always to be regarded as the center of the universe. So he got into some trouble for proposing the evidence for the Copernican or the heliocentric model I show on the right here, which really made it impossible to believe that the Earth was the center of the solar system, because there was another center, and that was the Jovian satellite system. Those images that I showed you before prove beyond all reasonable doubt that the Earth wasn't the only center of the solar system, that Jupiter was the center of its own mini solar system, and therefore there was no reason to regard the Earth as being so prominent. And of course, this got him into a little bit of trouble. He was called in front of the Pope. He was forced to admit that he had become guilty of suspected heresy, not actual heresy. If he was guilty of heresy, he would have been executed. But because he said it was suspicion of heresy, and he admitted that, and he recanted his claim that the Earth is not the center of the universe and that the Earth is stationary, in front of the Pope and this conquistador-looking fellow over there. This is the Inquisition, the Holy See. And so Galileo was allowed to remain in a house imprisonment for the remaining 9 years of his life. I actually hosted a conference outside of Florence in a little town called Arcetri, which is really resplendent. It has orchards and vineyards, and it's not a bad place at all to do one's time if you so have to do so. I always say Bernie Madoff would have traded places with Galileo in an instant. So he wasn't tortured. He wasn't, put to the rack or something like that. Instead, he was allowed to live out his days only about a mile away from his one of his daughters, who is, as I said before, illegitimate. And she was in a convent less than half a mile or so from Galileo's home, his final resting place. So with this tiny telescope, Galileo saw out to the realm of the stars and the objects in our galaxy. But it took a little bit longer, namely about 300 more years, before Edwin Hubble of Hubble telescope fame realized that actually the Milky Way galaxy isn't even the center of the universe. In fact, there's many, many other galaxies out there in the universe, and no galaxy can really claim to be the center because the universe is expanding. And it's expanding in such a way that every point is moving away from every other point at large, large fractions of the speed of light. Almost mind-bending to think about that some of these galaxies are currently receding away faster than the speed of light from the Earth. It's just amazing that this then ushered in the notion of a origin to time, because if the galaxies are moving apart from one another now, they must have been closer in the past. And if you extrapolate early enough in time, all the galaxies were effectively touching, compressed to a single point, perhaps called a singularity. So my job is to understand, how did all these other galaxies get there? How do you create matter from energy, from non-matter? How do you create life from inanimate matter? How do you create technological conscious life from unconscious life? From, as I say, from rocks to Bach, or Bach to bacteria to Bach. How do you make all those? I consider each one a sort of big bang in its own. So this is the fascinating research that I get to do. And along the way, hey, I thought I might win this gilded graven image of Alfred Nobel, which is the most prestigious, I claim, award of any kind on Earth, more prestigious than any Grammy or Emmy or anything like that, or Oscar, as we'll see. So what we're trying to do is push this timeline back to the earliest possible moment, which could be the origin of time itself. But that presents sort of a conundrum, Because have you ever thought about maybe a late night in college or maybe with a beverage of some kind with a friend? How does time change when time didn't exist a moment before time came into existence? These are fascinating philosophical questions that physicists are actively investigating and trying to understand, and to really go back as far as possible back in history. I co-invented this telescope to take us back to just a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second after the Big Bang. And that epoch is an epoch, as I describe in Losing the Nobel Prize, called inflation. You can think of inflation if the Big Bang is sort of an explosion in your mind, which is, more or less, very, very cartoon way to think about it. But the inflationary period was the match that sparked the explosion. And no one had ever seen evidence for that. And I realized if we could detect it, and it was in our capabilities to do so, then we would potentially not only go back as far as possible into the history of space and time, but we would go back and perhaps take home that gilded medal that I showed before. So I co-invented with my colleagues at Caltech a telescope that used not Galileo's retina or any other a human device, but instead these very, very advanced superconducting detectors known as transition edge superconductors. We took it, we had to cool it down to only a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. So minus negative 454 degrees Fahrenheit, just mind-bendingly, incomprehensibly cold. Instead of glass lenses on Galileo's telescope, we use actually this very high purity form of polyethylene, which is used in milk containers. And then we cool it using an isotope that comes from radioactive decay of helium, and that's called helium-3. We package it in a telescope that's significantly bigger, as you can see, than Galileo's little spyglass. And then we took it down to the South Pole, because these telescopes that I've devised are looking for traces of microwaves emanating from the Big Bang itself, 13.798 billion years ago. And we don't want these precious photons, these wispy imprimaturs of the inflationary spark, the match that ignited the Big Bang. We don't want them to get absorbed in a water molecule in the Earth's atmosphere. Just as when you put your coffee into the microwave, microwaves are absorbed by water. So you'd ideally like to go somewhere where there's no water, and that's space, but it's 100 times more expensive to put that telescope that I showed you a slide ago into space than it is to put it at the South Pole in Antarctica, which is where we ended up putting it. So I've been there twice, and my journeys were almost every bit as difficult as as these two teams who reached the South Pole for the very first time in human history over 110 years ago this week, basically. They used two different types of technology. The Norwegian team used advanced technology called sled dogs, and and the British used another type of technology known as human beings. So the British were actually in the form of the powered sled dog, so to speak. So when the British team got there 3 weeks after the Norwegian team, they came upon a Norwegian flag, and they ended up realizing that they were the second people to ever reach this event, to reach this location in human history, and that was very depressing to them. And and that must have been very similar to what I conceive of it would have felt like if Neil Armstrong had stepped out onto the lunar surface and had seen a flag of the former Soviet Union back in 1968. So I always kind of compare those two events as if that would have happened. But I want to assure you that it is still quite dangerous to go to the South Pole. The British team all died. Because they were doing the sled dogging themselves, they had to carry much more in terms of food and water and all sorts of other things, and heat, providing materials, logs, basically coal, kerosene, because they had to carry themselves instead of just feeding some dogs and then shooting the dogs at the end of the trip, at the middle of the trip when they reached the South Pole. But it's still very dangerous, as this video I shot demonstrates. The inhabitants of the South Pole are very angry people. No, these are not at the South Pole, but they are aggressive creatures. You think they're all cute. And in fact, they are not. And you have to be quite careful whether or not you're a penguin, or you dress in brightly lit clothing, as we have to, so that if we get lost, our bodies can be identified from the air during the brief polar summer rather, which starts next week. The 21st of December is the beginning of summer at the South Pole. The sun is up 24 hours a day. And I've only been there twice, and that was in over the course of December, January, and February. If you do not leave on the flight that leaves on February 15th, incidentally, that's my mentor Galileo's birthday, then you are stranded there for 9 months. And so we actually pay somebody to spend 9 months of his or her life there, and we tell them, well, you only have to work for one night. And so we get surprised how many people take us up on that. So we were looking for this particular type of pattern that I describe in Losing the Nobel Prize called B mode polarization. I won't get into that, but suffice to say, we found what we were looking for. And this was quite spectacular. This is a picture of sunrise at the South Pole about 6 years ago. So the guy who took this, Stefan Richter, he spent over a year of his life at the South Pole, and he's done so 9 consecutive years in a row. So basically his permanent address is the South Pole. Which makes them very hard to track down by the IRS or the mafia or your credit card company. I don't know which is worse. But this made headlines all around the world. As you can see here, it was a viral video on YouTube the same day we made this discovery, which is March 17th, St. Patrick's Day of 2014. There was a press conference at Harvard. It was on CNN, the same picture I just showed you, basically. And we were basically talked about even in the newspaper of record, the most important newspaper on earth, the San Diego Union Tribune. You see a picture of myself down there, sky gazing. But you see in the New York Times, space ripples seen as the Big Bang's smoking gun. I like the headline at the bottom, printed around that time, which said that seems to imply that some guy just suddenly looked up. Oh, wow, the Big Bang just occurred. Lingering in the back of our mind was this concept that what we had seen might not have been what we thought it was. In other words, we might have seen an imposter signal lurking there. In our case, it would be called interstellar dust. And lo and behold, the signal that we saw was later found to be not related to the origin of the universe, but to the origin of planets, people, and all sorts of other things that we know and love, namely the rocky planet that we are living on. This giant ball of rock is actually the result of billions of years of growth of these tiny microscopic particles of dust called galactic dust. And so within a few months of our claimed discovery, we basically had to retract it. And along with that came the disappearance of my Nobel ambitions, disappearing, blowing into the wind. And later that month, or just after the retraction, I came to my office in San Diego and I saw a letter and it said, Brian Keating, will you do us the honor of nominating the winners of the Nobel Prize in Physics for 2016, which could have been the year that I won the Nobel Prize, theoretically. So as if, if you're like, a lawyer and somebody comes up to you and says, I need a lawyer. Can you recommend someone who's better than you? So it didn't feel particularly great, but I took it very seriously. And please keep this strictly confidential. Okay, I'm not supposed to show this invitation. So it said that I should do a lot of due diligence and find a person to nominate to win the 2016 Nobel Prize, and that person should have basically done research that was worthy and beneficial to all mankind. And I looked back upon receiving this document. I said, what did Alfred Nobel really want? And I looked it up and I read his chicken scratch and I understand Swedish very well. No, I can't decipher it, but luckily it's translated. Here's what it says. It says, the whole of my estate, because Alfred had no wife, no children. He never married, never had children. So he donated all of his money to these prizes that bear his name. And they should be given to people, a person in the preceding year who conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. This is what's known, as I ask about on my podcast, Into the Impossible, as an ethical will. So he's giving away money, but he's also giving away for a purpose, for an ethical reason, to bequeath a wisdom within his will, his last will. And so I started to take it very seriously. in my religion, which is Judaism, you're supposed to honor the dead's wishes at all costs, because there's no way that they can advocate for themselves, and there's also no way that they can do the same favor for you. So it's seen as the highest form of altruism. And that's why Jews don't allow a dead body to be unescorted, for example. And that's why Jews are buried very rapidly, almost the same day as they die often. But anyway, Alfred was cremated, and I came to look at his will and compared it to this document, which said that I could select someone who did work very long ago, decades ago, and it could be multiple people, candidates plural, and no mention of it conferring any benefit to mankind. So it's the three things that Alfred specifically requested: preceding year, in other words, the discovery had to be made last year. It had to confer a great benefit to mankind, and it could only go to a single person. All three of those stipulations were completely, categorically, unequivocally ignored in the invitation that I was being asked to sign on to. So I found that very outrageous. And it made me do a deeper dive into past awards to see if and when people had actually adhered to this. I don't have the ability to run a poll, but I often do run polls. I should stop. Are there any questions at this point? I see that there's a chat here, but
Keep
I
on
can't.
going. Just keep on going. We're in love with what you're saying. Keep
Awesome.
on going.
All right. So I want you to think for a second. There are three monumental discoveries shown here. At least two of them are monumental. All of them were invented or discovered during the time in which the Nobel Prizes existed, after 1901. The discovery of the RNA molecule, the discovery and creation of the periodic table of the elements, which I have memorized and tattooed on my left buttocks, and then the lighthouse. And so I want to ask you, which do you think of these three inventions and discoveries resulted in a Nobel Prize? Well, of course, it's the lighthouse. And I always joke, yeah, I don't use my GPS and my phone to get around. I navigate by lighthouse. And this was Gustave Deleuze. He won the 1912 Nobel Prize for his invention of automatic regulators for use in conjunction with gas accumulators for illuminating lighthouses and buoys. So that obviously has tremendous applicability. I mean, Apple's coming out with one of these gas accumulators any day now, as far as I know. So, of course, they're not the only form of controversy are the prizes that have been awarded. There are also prizes that haven't been awarded. I'll describe one in the Peace Prize that happened later on very egregiously. But there have been awards such as this one to Gustave Deleuze. I'll point out, in 1912, you may recognize a man by the name of Albert Einstein, who came up with the theory of relativity 7 years earlier and did not win the Nobel Prize until 1922. So 10 years after, did not receive it until 1922. And part of that was because of this historic anti-Semitism that took place in Europe, in Sweden, and in particular within the Eastern European halls of science that were the nominators typically for Nobel Prizes. They had an unwritten rule. Einstein and someone who practiced in what was known as Jewish physics could not win the Nobel Prize.
Hey, Brian, I got a question relative to that. You said that they want the prize to be for a contribution in the last year, but doesn't it often take many, many years or even decades to know if the contribution really mattered?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Higgs boson was only discovered in 2012, and it was predicted in 1962. So yes, it took 50 years before they knew that it had this potential for revolutionary confirmation of an effect. And in fact, some of Einstein's greatest discoveries were made only in the last few years, or confirmation of those were only made in the first few years. He died in 1955. So the question is, how closely do you adhere? It's like the Constitution of the United States. Some say it's a living document. Some say they're originalists, that they want to interpret it exactly as it was written. And both sides, can have valid arguments. In the case of a will, it's less clear. Like if I say I want this money to go to this, prevention of, I'm just going to pick an odd topic. I'm not going to talk about if I believe in it or not, but Planned Parenthood. I say, I want all my money to go to Planned Parenthood, and then my executors of my will, because I don't have children, they all give it to the Westboro Baptist Church or something, whatever they give it to, some huge, virulently anti-abortion. I mean, at some level, is there a moral obligation to honor an individual's last will and testament as opposed to, say, a country's last will and testament? It's a very good question, but I wanted to be kind of a strict constitutionalist when it came to my nomination, at least. I will point out on this table of elements, I didn't point it out. If you look very closely on the bottom row, the second to the last element on the lowermost row is element 102, symbol NO. What do you think that stands for? Nobelium. So even the periodic table, which has an element named after Alfred Nobel, didn't win the Nobel Prize. So some of that's pretty egregious. Some of these winners here are, convicted terrorists. There's Barack Obama, who even admitted himself that he didn't feel he deserved it after being on the job for less than 2 weeks in 2009. Bob Dylan didn't even show up for the award in 2016 when he won it. In 2018, the Nobel Prize in Literature was canceled because of a sex scandal, which is shown here. So there's been a lot of kind of revolution and reformation in the Peace Prize and in the Literature Prize, but never in the physics or chemistry prizes or in the medicine prize. Never has a Nobel been retracted, no matter how egregious, no matter how disgusting the individual who won it. And in the case of literal mass murderers who won it in Myanmar, who are under investigation by the International Criminal Court now, Aung San Suu Kyi, she's under investigation for genocide, and her Nobel Prize was never rescinded. So I want to just finish up. I don't know how many women are on the line, but some of the women I've spoken to feel that this is part of the reason that the Nobel Prize has only gone to women twice in the last 60 years in physics. And it stems from this statement that Alfred Nobel put in his will, which is that he gave 200,000 crowns to his nephews. And remember, he had no kids of his own. And to his niece, his only niece, he gave half that sum. So some say that's because it's very sexist, and it started off being very sexist. Prior to the writing of my book, these were the only two women on the left who had ever won a Nobel Prize. Maria Geppert-Mayer is the woman who my physics department at UC San Diego is named after. She was here. She won it in 1963. Before that, it was Maria Curie 60 years earlier. And then it would be almost another 60 years until Donna Strickland won it in 2018. And when Maria Mayer won it, there was a headline in the San Diego Union Tribune, and the headline read, "La Jolla housewife wins Nobel Prize." And we all think that's kind of funny. It's kind of the sign of the times back in 1963. But here's a picture from 2 years ago. My friend Frances Arnold, she won the Nobel Prize in 2018 in chemistry. And it says Caltech mom wins Nobel Prize. Son is JPL Mars flight technician. So they don't even mention the mother's name, the woman who won it. And she's more than just a mother. She's one of the world's leading scientists in chemistry and biology. So it's pretty amazing. This stuff still goes on. And I want to point out, perhaps the most egregiously overlooked person who didn't win a Nobel Prize was nominated the same number of times as Adolf Hitler, who also, thank goodness, did not win the Nobel Peace Prize. But Mahatma Gandhi said the seeker after truth should be humbler than the dust. The world crushes the dust under its feet, but the seeker after truth should so humble himself that even the dust could crush him. Only then, and not until then, will he have a glimpse of truth. So it's certainly true that nowadays we want to approach our view of the cosmos with great humility so that we don't get crushed under the weight of this most microscopic and mercurial substance known as cosmic dust. So to do that, we're building a new telescope in the high Atacama Desert of northern Chile. I'm the director of this project. It's called the Simons Observatory. We have now 300 people on this project from all over the world. It's funded primarily by the Simons Foundation in New York City, the Heising Simons Foundation in the Bay Area. And it's going to be built here. And it's actually, this is a picture from 3 years ago. We actually started pouring concrete and are building this $100 million observatory at 17,000 feet above sea level, because again, we want to get away from water at all costs. And so we want to go into the driest desert on Earth until we get the $10 billion to build a telescope in space. This is what the site will look like. We have very advanced technology that we're working on. The bottom line is this telescope can see the cosmic signals that would be harbingers of the Big Bang's spark, but also humble ourselves and look for dust and dust alone, and then compare the two signals and see which one is more strong, and hopefully we'll avoid the fate of my previous experiment bicep. So you want to learn from these mistakes, and I'll finish up. I should finish up here before I get too technical. I know you guys are serious nerds just like me, but let's finish up here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, guys, if you want to start diving into questions, first, thank you so much. I'm gonna, do you want to keep the screen up there? Because I'd like to have a picture of your book. Can you throw up your book cover real quick?
Sure, yeah, I can put it up. Actually, I'll scroll down here. I think it's here, yeah. So my book is here, and then I should put in, I really mostly want, I'll put my YouTube channel in the chat. Let me just ask you all here, YouTube. Just click on that, would you? And also, I would love it if you would join my mailing list. I send out giveaways. I give away these meteorites, which are pieces of cosmic dust that are 4.2 billion years old. Can you see me, or are you just looking at the screen?
We see both.
I'm sorry that you have to look at me. I give away Nobel Prizes. This is a real Nobel Prize that I pinched from one of the, this is a chocolate Nobel Prize. So here is the cover of the book. And there is, whoops, why did it go away? Go for it. So here's this. So click on my mailing list, join that. Actually, you'll get access to a very, very special interview I did with Jim Simons, who's been like a father figure to me my whole life. I've known him since before I was born. And he is reputedly, I don't know who else is on this call, but he's called the world's smartest billionaire. So yes, happy to take questions. Happy to.
Okay. First question I want to ask real quick is, when you talked about the Bose-Higgs spin, that was a team. That was a team that actually dove into that process. It doesn't seem like Nobel really recognizes teams. They look at individuals.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So I've interviewed 8 Nobel laureates in the last 6 months on my podcast. And without question, the one rule that is most violated and most egregiously so in their opinions, these are Nobel Prize winners. So most people say, oh, Brian, you're just a bitter clinger. You're just this guy who's got sour grapes, and you're a hypocrite because you would love to win the Nobel Prize. I say, well, you can see if I'm a hypocrite. You can just ask the committee to nominate me and give it to me. And if I don't turn it down, I am a hypocrite. But in all actuality, I say, do you have to be president of the United States to criticize the president or your governor or something like that? No. And actually, do you have to win the World Series to write about what's wrong with baseball? So in actuality, I still believe that people, won't listen to me necessarily, but they listen to Nobel Prize winners, and they do listen to those that have won it, because for one thing, they're entitled to nominate the winners for the rest of their lives. So in other words, a Nobel Prize winner I had on my show last week, Barry Barish, he said, he is now able to nominate people for the rest of his life. And so oftentimes you see a correlation, friends of friends win it, the Matthew effect, rich get richer. But he said specifically, yeah, it's not fair. And I said, that the whole team didn't win. That was 1,000 people on the LIGO search for gravitational waves that was successful. The same for the Higgs boson. They all agree there should have been people that won it. And in fact, now they say 3 people can win it. In the year that the Higgs was recognized, they only gave it to 2 people. So the committee makes up rules. I have theories that I discuss in the book as to why do they make up the rules? Why is it that only one person in human history has won 2 Nobel Prizes in physics, where there's, Rita Hayworth won 8 Oscars? So in other words, the best people should continue to, Einstein had 7 Nobel Prize worthy ideas. He only won it once. And so it's not purely meritocratic, and certainly egregiously, it doesn't go to teams, unlike the Peace Prize, which does go to teams. So you see, it's very arbitrary how they choose to interpret.
It sounds like you need to go with maybe the World Economic Forum over in Davos and partner with them and create a brand new type of prize that elevates teams and individuals on their merits and what they're doing.
Well, that's a great idea. In fact, there's a prize called the Breakthrough Prize, co-funded by Mark Zuckerberg and Yuri Milner and other billionaires, that have more money than Davos. But they do give away prizes. And I've heard it said by people that have won the Breakthrough Prize, which awards to scientists, astronomers, et cetera, that they would trade, 10 of these prizes, which is worth $3 million. the Nobel Prize might be worth $100,000, if you share it after taxes, et cetera. And they said they would trade the $3 million prize for the $100,000 Nobel Prize in a heartbeat because it's so much more prestigious. And I think it's a form, I describe it in my book as a form of kind of ironically, my fellow scientists are extremely atheistic, extremely secular. I call myself a practicing devout agnostic. I'm not going to proselytize. I don't believe in that. I believe it's a very personal thing. On the other hand, I believe in at least, practicing, I believe in religion. I always say, I don't know if I believe in God, but I definitely believe in religion when it's done right. So I always say that the reason that these scientists venerate the Nobel Prize is it's become a form of religion to them, that they have a priesthood. The people that win it, they have the Vatican, the equivalent of the Vatican, which is the Nobel Committee. They have the apostates, people like me. They have holidays. They have Annunciation and they have Coronation Day. By the way, the Nobel Prize is awarded on December 10th every year. And it's awarded, that is the day that Alfred Nobel died, not was born. It's very scatological.
By the way, Peter Diamandis has tried to create his own prize too. I mean,
yes, the X Prize. Yes, he's a friend of mine.
Hey, we got a few moments real quick. Let me go first. Jeffrey, your question, go for it. Unmute yourself.
Oh, hi. Hi, guys. And Brian, that was great. Thanks. Galileo, incredible. What can you say? But many decades ago, I had the privilege to meet and work a little bit with Neil Taruk when he was back at Cambridge at the Center for Mathematical Sciences. And then later when he went up to the Perimeter Institute. And you mentioned earlier that that you worked on something with him or are working on something with him. And so what is that all about? That would be
well, yeah. So I'm not working directly with him. I'm working with his close collaborator is a man by the name of Paul Steinhardt. He's the Albert Einstein Professor of Science at Princeton University. They wrote a book together, which I devoured, called Endless Universes. And Paul's been on my show. I'm hoping to get Neil Turok on the Into the Impossible podcast soon, so please subscribe to that. Anyway, Neil and Paul have a counter argument, a counter universe, a universe that doesn't rely on an inflationary spark whatsoever, and in fact oscillates into and out of existence. So I'm fascinated by Neil's arguments. He's extremely brilliant. I'm hoping to have him on the show. As I said, I'll put a link to that, to the show right now on iTunes, if that's the way you get your podcast, in the chat. So please subscribe to that. And you'll help me get people like Neil back or on the show, maybe in conversation with the foremost proponent of inflation, who's a man by the name of Alan Guth at MIT.
Oh, that would be
killer. One more question, Charles. Real quick, because Charles, I'm going to let you do your question, and then we're out of time. Go for it, Charles. Unmute yourself. Charles, maybe Charles already ran off. That's too bad. Well, Brian, thank you so much for making time with us. I know generally Saturdays are not a time where you can actually be on Zoom. I get it, because a family, you have 2 kids. Congratulations on that. Being a father, an early father, is one of the best joys in life.
I've got more than that.
How many kids you got?
I just have 5.
Just 5. Okay, so you're a Mormon Jew.
I'm starting. That's right. It's either Mormon or evangelical or Catholic. But I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, as you will find out in my book.
Damn, so much going on. So get the book, guys. And again, Brian, thank you so much for sharing time with us. We really appreciate it, guys. Everyone unmute yourself and thank Brian for being with us today.
Thank you guys. This is a blast for me. It's a big bang.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Holidays, guys.
Thanks, Brian. That was awesome.
Thanks, Brian.
Awesome. Bye, guys.